and thank you for joining us for this episode of the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. It is Thursday. That means it's 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, and we are here talking all things leadership. I guess you need to know who we are. That's Robert Hilliard. I am Whitney Wiley, and there is a guest with us, which means it's the third Thursday of the month, and I will introduce our guest in just a moment. How's it going, Robert?
It's going well. I'm excited to talk to Cathleen and to get her perspective. So I can't wait to get started.
Awesome. So if you're a leader who has experienced the devastating loss of a child, you know firsthand the unique challenges and pain that come with that. That's where our guest this month comes in. It's Cathleen Elle, drawing on her own personal experience as a parent who has lost a child. Cathleen provides compassionate and transformational support to leaders who have faced this unimaginable tragedy. As a master healing coach, healer, visionary guide for sudden loss, Cathleen helps parents release trauma, ignite their inner light, and realize their unique purpose. Her award-winning book, Shattered Together, A Mother's Journey from Grief to Belief, is a practical and inspirational guide for anyone struggling with loss. Cathleen also has been featured as an expert on spiritual healing and wellness-related topics on major media outlets. In addition to all of that, she's been a co-host with me and three others of the Beyond Your Best Plan podcast over the last 2.5 years, and will be co-hosting with me on a new YouTube show. Wow. Launching in a few weeks. Tongue-tied, yes, I am. But more importantly, she's an awesome person and a dear friend. Cathleen, welcome to the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond.
Thank you, Whitney and Robert. It's such a pleasure and honor to be here with two amazing people. So thank you.
Thank you. It's our pleasure to have you here. So as I mentioned, Cathleen and I have been a co-host on another podcast that I do. She really is an awesome person. And Robert's going to lead us in our discussion today, where you have an opportunity to learn more about Cathleen and not only who she is as a person, but the work that she does with leaders. So, Robert.
Thanks, Whitney. Cathleen, we typically ask the same types of questions on the show. And one of the reasons why we do that is because we ask the same questions, but people give just a whole host of different answers to those questions. But your journey has been so unique, I had to rewrite my entire script. So we're going to start there. I'm going to ask you the first question that I typically ask every guest, and that is it's really a statement. Tell us about your journey and what led to you doing the work that you do.
It's typical, Robert, for people to say, you're kind of unique. You don't really fit in the box, which I love. So in brief, my journey started as a child in a low-income, abusive environment where there was sexual, physical, and emotional abuse. So I started my early childhood off in a space that I created programs, or there were programs created that was unworthy and unlovable. I followed those programs, and I also believed that there was more to life than what I experienced. So I took that pain and jumped into doing, which was I became a business owner. I served in government for more than 25 years. I was an elected official. I worked for the governor of the state of Vermont, and I was also a CEO of the largest commercial contractors association in the state of Vermont as a lobbyist. So when I was working for the association, I had a pretty important board meeting that I was stepping into to decide whether I was going to stay or if I was going to leave. And during that board meeting, one of my colleagues came in and informed me that my son had taken his life. And when he had taken his life, he wasn't speaking with me. And he actually wrote a note saying he didn't want me at his service. So not only did my world shatter when I found out, but then a month later, I found out about the note. So I hit yet another low. But as I was laying on the grave of my son, begging, pleading, wishing, whoever, whatever took him to please take me too. I didn't say please, I had other words in there. I got this message that was just like my body became calm. I stopped crying, and I got this just clear message saying, if this happened in your life, then you're meant to do something with it. Now go do it. And so it was then that I changed the way I stepped into my healing journey. And for the next couple of years, I really delved into being the voice for suicide prevention, suicide awareness, and being the face of that for the state of Vermont. Yet each time I did that, every time that I went on for an interview or I did a radio show or whatever it was, I found myself really being down and out. It would take me out for days, if not weeks at a time, because I still hadn't dealt with the pain that I was holding, the guilt, the shame, the blame. And as a leader, I had to show up at work. I wasn't performing my job the way that I would have normally performed it. And what mattered before no longer mattered. So then I stepped into, energy healing, cognitive thought therapy, mediums, and eventually I became a certified master healer and certified master coach. Delved into plant medicines, and there are two modalities that really has changed my life forever, that helped me see that while my son's physical presence is gone and I had the opportunity to work through the sadness and the grief of that, I also know that his energetic presence is still here. And so it shifted my perspective. So now I get to use my experience and my expertise to help other leaders and parents move through their grief in a healthier way and give them tools and techniques so where they can actually see and feel the difference in how they grieve. So we eliminate the unnecessary suffering is what we do.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Can I just ask it? So Kathleen, obviously I know your story, and we share some similarities in our stories, and that I lost my son suddenly as well. But just while that's where you started, obviously that's not where you've ended, right? And just talk a little bit about loss and grief, not just in the context of death, right? Losing someone, but sort of in a bigger context that, because we all are going to lose people that we love, whether we have up till now or not. And we are going to experience other types of losses as well, whether it's relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, jobs, and others. And so just can you set a context for loss in general, and so that if someone is watching this, it's not, well, I haven't lost anyone, so there's nothing for me in this conversation.
Great point, Whitney. So whenever there's a major loss in your life, it creates a belief within you. It can create that you're not worthy, that you shouldn't, that you don't have the qualifications, that it creates limited beliefs within your body. And that's inclusive of a job loss. And whatever you haven't worked through, whatever trauma, whatever experience that you've had in your life prior to that event, is now going to rise to the surface, because whenever you've gone through a major loss, it shatters any wall that you've created around any other loss in your life or any other experience that you haven't really worked through. So it becomes a complicated experience, a complicated grief process. And so it does apply. I might be speaking specifically to losing a child, but it also can apply to losing a job, losing your home, losing a family member in a way of Alzheimer's or dementia, or like any major shift in your life that will crack you open, especially as a leader. And I can get into it now or a little later, but how we operate throughout the day. I'm just going to use 10 units. Throughout the day, we have 10 units on how we operate. But that's your daily practice, that's your, whatever you do, you're checking your social media, going to work, doing all the things that you do, connecting with your family. You have 10 units that you operate in. When you go through a major change in your life, those 10 units are cut down to about 2 units to manage all that you do, all that you did before within those 2 units, because the rest of them are going to your grieving process. So that's why you lose memory. That's why you forget. That's why you don't have a lot of follow through. That's why you have a hard time focusing. So there's all kinds of reasons why, and it connects to all kinds of losses.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a really great explanation. Thank you for sharing that. The question I like to ask you now is, how did you heal from your loss?
Well, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it's been a little like a continuum for me over the last 13 years. It was in 2010 when Logan took his life. And each process that I stepped into created a foundation for yet another process. The 2 major ways that I was able to move through the limiting beliefs, blocks, programs that are in my body is regenerating images and memory, which is a way of going within your body and finding where you have programs and recreating stories around it, and plant medicine. Plant medicine is inclusive of ayahuasca, psilocybin, San Pedro, iboga, bufo, kambo. And all of them have made a huge impact for me. Just like RIM has. RIM actually prepared me to step into the medicines, but RIM does help you create the story and see, so you can step into the fears of what you're afraid of stepping into. You step into it with a facilitated process, and you're able to see from a higher perspective information that you didn't have when the program was created, from both you and anybody else that's involved in the situation. So you can create more compassion, you forgive very easily, and you realize that you've just been allowing your 3-year-old or 7-year-old or 18-month-old to rule and dictate your life. Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
I feel like a lot of leaders, with or without some traumatic incident in their lives, right, are ruling from their 18-month-old. So
it's true. Even when you go through a divorce, that 18-month-old pops up. I can promise you, it pops up.
Yeah, it's amazing that in many ways, and Whitney and I talk about this, we're still that rage-filled adolescent in some ways when the stressors come out, or that person that's always looking for validation as well, so that the little us is still there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly.
So I can tell by just how you're talking about this that this challenge opened you up, and you learned a whole lot about yourself and about the world. So what lessons did you learn along the way that leaders can apply?
The teachings are wide and broad. First of all, the first teaching that I received is that we have to feel our feelings, because if we don't feel our feelings, we become trapped within them and they just get bigger. So masking them, avoiding them, overworking, overeating, undereating, whatever it is, any kind of extremes only exasperates the issue. It doesn't help it. So the first teaching is that the first teaching is that you have to actually acknowledge your feelings and walk through them. The second teaching is when we actually see every event as an experience that has some soul wisdom included in it, then we can see it from a totally different perspective. That yes, it's an experience that's challenging. Yes, it doesn't feel fair. It's not right. All the emotions that we have around it. And there's more information there. So there's an opportunity for us to walk through the pain that the experience has provided us, to be able to free us from that pain and embody the wisdom of that. So we can use our experiences as the way we show up in the world. So as a leader, if you actually step into whatever loss that you've had, you work through your emotions, you show up very differently in work. The perception that you get 3 days or 10 days off to grieve whatever you grieve, and you think that you come back, leaders that haven't experienced this, the reality is if your employee has gone through a loss that's traumatic, as a divorce or anything else, or an individual who's gone, who's physically no longer here, they don't have the ability to show up the way you want them to. You have to show up in a more compassionate way. And if you as a leader have gone through this and you've actually stepped into your grief differently, you're going to be more compassionate and your employees are going to be much happier because you're actually able to acknowledge, okay, that's not working any longer. So how can we support you in this process? Your workload was fine prior to this. And today we're going to ask other people to step in to help you out for as long as you need it.
I want to, that point is such a good one. And when I went through my experience after my son passed away, my employer, I will say this, and Robert knows over the course of the last 10 years that we've known each other, we study organizational development and leadership. And so much of our early interactions had to do with our experiences in the organizations that we worked with and worked for, right? And the people that we work with, we were bringing that experience to that academic environment. And I have often had harsh things to say about the work culture that I was in at the time that we met. I will say this, and I feel absolutely blessed that when I went through the experience after my son passed, the love and support that I got from my employer, I think some of it, Kathleen, stems from something you just said, that the boss was going through something himself at the time. So my boss had been diagnosed with ALS, and he had not yet disclosed it to the organization, but he knew he had it and he knew what he was going through. And I remember him calling me and saying, take as much time as you need, right? We got 3 days, as you mentioned, we got 3 days of bereavement. And he said, take as much time as you need. And I took him at his word, right? A lot of people would have said, he's just saying that, and I'm not going to take the extra time. I took him at his word. And then at some point while I was off, he called and said, I would love to have lunch with you. We had lunch. He gave me a book called a grief disguised. I should have looked that up. I wasn't planning to share this, and now I can't think of.
Okay.
It's by Jerry Sitzer, and I believe it's A Grief Disguised. And in the book, Jerry tells the story of his the tragedy of losing his wife, his mother, and one of his kids. Right, so someone from 3 generations of his life that died as a result of an accident, a car crash with a drunk driver. And so I took the book, read the book, and got the message that my boss was trying to extend to me. But what he said to me while we were having lunch, he reiterated, you need to take as much time as you need. And when you're ready to come back, we will support you. And I took 6 weeks off, 6 weeks. And then when I went back part-time.
Mhm.
And I was out of the office. I did not return to the office full-time until about 6 months later. And I get maybe that is not possible in every work situation, but having that ability made all the difference in the world. And whether it is the loss of a child, a parent, or a relationship, whatever it is, right? I've been divorced. That's not easy either, right? that loss is not easy either. And so, having leaders who will give you the space
Mhm.
to take care of yourself so that when you do come back, you can come back and bring your full self. And that's what we talk about here on State of Leadership, right? Is leaders who want their employees, their team members to bring their full selves, their whole selves with them. And you can't do that if your mind is scattered to the wind, right, in all different directions. So I do give that particular boss and that time in my life, just tremendous gratitude for what they allowed me to do. But I would, if you're listening to this, yes, I get maybe you feel like we've got to have some parameters around this, but being open to really hearing what your people need and how providing a little more space and compassion and understanding in what they're going through in their lives will help them when they do come back, bring their whole selves with them.
I love that you shared that, Whitney, because all of that is true. I was fortunate as well. My employer was amazing, and so were my employees. Like they picked up some slack. I would drive to the office and find myself that I couldn't even get out of the car because I was in hysterics. And then I would text them and say, I'm just going to go home and work from home. They would pick up the slack. They paid me when I was gone. They actually even helped me with a grief expert for a period of time, so they were an amazing employer in that way, in every way possible. Some of the things I think that employers don't even think about, leaders that are really leading large companies or small companies, they don't think about how they can best show up for the person who's lost. And some of the things you could do is mention the person's name, ask the individual what they need from you. How can we best support you? Because everyone's different. And the third lesson here is everyone's different. Everyone grieves differently. Every grief is different because everyone has different experiences. And so communicating what your needs are, as well as asking what their needs are, it's really important. So your needs, meaning the person who's had the loss. Right. You have the responsibility and the opportunity to communicate what your needs are, because if you don't, your employer doesn't know what you need.
Absolutely. And not thinking, and that last point, not thinking that everyone should do it the way you've done it, right? That they should grieve the way, I went through that and it worked out like this, so that's how it should work out for you. So
yeah. relationships end, jobs end when you don't communicate what you need, because no one's a mind reader. Well, some people are. And
Well, except mind readers, right?
However, your boss is probably not a mind reader, nor are your employees. So speaking what you need is really critical to the success of your journey.
You know, it's very interesting to me when Whitney was talking and reminding me of a couple things, that how long we've actually known each other. That's it doesn't seem that long, but it's been 10 years. And those conversations, those early conversations that we had, and it reminded me of working with my former boss, who expected all of us and the people that worked in the organization to come in like robots.
Mm-hmm.
And no matter, like, we didn't have personal lives. You know, and I, the thing that really, it didn't shock me, but I was kind of surprised that when he had an issue, he always had a parade of people going in there that he wanted to talk. Even us, he would like bring up his personal stuff and keep us in the office talking about it, but he wouldn't allow us to do that. Mm-hmm. So I say that because one of the things that I used to always talk about when I would train managers there is, whether you want them to or not, your employees will bring their whole selves to work. It's good. They're gonna bring their whole selves to work. People usually are not very good at compartmentalizing. You know, some people can do it, and some that can. There are some that can, but not as well as they think they can. But we do bring our whole selves to work. And so with that, I want to just segue into the next question is, how do you typically work with leaders in the work that you do?
I work with them one-on-one or in groups. I just got back from 6 weeks in Costa Rica and Ecuador and did some retreats with leaders and profound changes. So we do emotional processing. And so I partially coaching and partially going in your body. And we've also incorporated some medicine on some of those retreats, not all of them, but and hopefully in the States, we'll be able to do that soon with psilocybin, because what medicine does and what the process that I work with is that we go in our bodies and actually feel. We actually start to connect with our physical body, our emotional body, our mental body, and our spiritual body. So there's like 4 layers there. And the more connected we are, the more able people are to work through. So I become more of a facilitator. I'm intuitive as well. So I have pictures show up for me. I have, information that comes through for me. So when they're in a process, I'm being guided as well. They're speaking aloud to me, but when they're speaking aloud to me, I'm also being guided to where to guide them, facilitate their process. In addition, it's coaching. A lot of it, some people just need to speak their truth and then reframe their language to become aware more of what the experience is versus it being attached to the trauma of it. And to give them tools like a daily practices to step into to help them stay centered and conscious. It really comes back to forgiveness of self in every single way. It doesn't matter who it is, doesn't matter where you are. It really comes back to reshaping the beliefs that you've had and the generational trauma. What medicine has done for me has shown me that there were 3 generations in my family who lost their only son suddenly and traumatically. Differently, all different, but 3 generations. And with plant medicine and RIM, I was able to, release, purge from my body that generational trauma and see from a new perspective that people just, when you don't speak of your experience, when you're hiding it, you're cutting yourself off from others. You're creating a wall in front of your heart and you're cutting yourself off from others and you're repeating, you call in what you don't want.
Yeah.
By doing that.
So I have another. So this is, we should put something on the show called Unrehearsed Question Alert. So when you said that, something popped up in my head, and Whitney knows me very well. And she knows that I'm a science guy. I'm a research guy. And I tend to stay away from what a lot of people call woo-woo, right? And so how do you deal with leaders that, I'm going to say like me, right? When they may come to you, but they resist some of the spirituality part of it, the spiritual part of it, or they come in kind of kicking and screaming and holding on to the door jamb, right? So how do you work with those folks?
I'm compassionate, and there's no judgment with me. With the people that I work with, I can promise you, I have probably experienced most of what other people have experienced in one form or another. And by sitting with me, they have opened up. I have one person who is works in in anesthesia. She's the head of some anesthesia practice, and she was very linear and didn't believe in the woo at all when we first started. And since, because I've held the compassionate space that was all like, there's no judgment. You share with me your comfort. I build that relationship of comfort and safety when people are working with me. And she shared something with me that she'd never shared with anybody, no one else. And when she saw that I wasn't judgmental, that I was able to just communicate with her, create a new story around the situation, she was able to open up more and then become more aware of the spirituality of it. And so I don't force it. Everyone has their own journey. I work with the person who is in front of me or the people that are in front of me. Listen, I worked with a lawyer, a senator, architect, and a film producer in one of my retreats. And so talking about linear, in many of those practices, they were very linear. By the time they left, they came in very heavy and sad and full, like just full of pain. And within a week, they left and they had smiles and they were beaming, and they were like, the architect was a male, and he was just like, I can't even tell you how transformative this was for me. I was able to experience things with my daughter that I never thought I would be able to experience just by participating in the process. And the other thing that I think is important for people is community. Find a community that you are comfortable to be able to share with. That's why I target certain targets. Right now I'm working with leaders who have lost children in a particular group. And then even, in the near future, I'll be working with siblings who have lost a sibling. And so I like to bring them together. Their grief is very different, but there's an ability to relate when you are in a community that can understand where you are or where you've been.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm glad we're recording this, because one of my colleagues who is definitely into the woo-woo is constantly cramming it down my throat. And Whitney knows me, I'll reject that.
You're gonna be defensive and rejecting, right? So it's such a good point. Before you go on, Robert, I think not to pass over this importance of holding space and giving people the opportunity to come around, right? And as leaders, again, many of us have been selected for, particularly when we're talking about positions of leadership. And I know the three of us believe that leadership is not limited to titles, but when we are elevated to positions of leadership, right, there is a perception that we have to show up a particular way, that we have to be in a particular, whether you think about it this way or not, a particular energetic space. And in reality, your job really is to help people to come around right? To going back to being your whole self, to being your healthy self. And while it may not be your role as the leader or the organization's job to get someone there, giving them space and time to get there is right. You can build that into it, because a lot of times the culture that you claim you're creating, or your values, are generally way more woo woo, right, than people tend to show up, and leaders will show up a little more stoic, and that I have to have this facade and show up a particular way. And what people want and will relate to is your authenticity, your compassion, your empathy, right? Your willingness to listen and not judge and tell people what they should do, how they should do it. And then you can get back something that will allow your team members, right, to ultimately to trust you. And when you can build that trust, then you can get so much further as a team, when you actually have trust amongst you in a relational way that then translates to the work that you're doing.
I love that point. I just want to just touch on that for a second, if I may. That point's it's really important, Whitney, because any leader who walks into a social setting, let's put it out there, Robert, when you walk into an annual meeting or a conference, you walk in and you feel the energy of what's happening. You feel it. Now, you may not be woo-woo, but I can tell you, the second you walk into any room, you know what's happening.
Yes.
You can sense it. If you walk in and you're like, whoa, I don't want to be here, there's something off here, you walk away. Or if it feels fun and light and joyful, you feel that too, and you join in with that. So I think that's a really important point, is that energetically, when you are guarded because of your experience, if you're guarded and you don't share that with others, then they sense that whether they know it or not. They're sensing that you're not open enough, so they don't feel safe to open up with you.
And many times you're the reason why they leave the room.
Exactly.
It's your energy that you're bringing in. The energy was fine until you came in.
Exactly.
Right? And you're wondering why people aren't talking anymore. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a great conversation, and it's amazing to me. I always get amazed. I'm easily amazed, as Whitney knows. How when we do this, how things just kind of connect and connect and connect. So the question I want to ask you now is, what are some of the biggest challenges the leaders you work with face?
Believing they have to show up a certain way. That's one of the biggest challenges. The second is feeling like sometimes when they've gone through such a traumatic loss, they feel like they're a fraud. Because as I mentioned earlier, the second before you found out about whatever you found out, you were a different person. Mm-hmm. And so when you have a traumatic experience happen in your life, what mattered before no longer matters.
Right.
It just doesn't. And so trying to adjust to what does matter, what doesn't matter, trying to be the leader that you were when you're not, there's all kinds of mixed messages emotionally for you. And so I think that's the biggest challenge. And the second biggest challenge is their mind needs to be convinced. The linear thinkers, their mind needs to be convinced of one thing when their emotional body is going through another. And so I work with that.
That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Whitney, this has been just phenomenal. This has been a lot different, and I knew it was going to be different. And so I had to prepare myself, because usually we talk about the dry leadership stuff. But we're very fortunate because we have all the guests that we've had so far have come from just such a wide range of backgrounds and experiences that those typical 5 questions that I ask generate so much energy and so many connections that this has been a wonderful conversation. So Whitney, I have nothing else to to add. So take us home.
Thank you for leading the conversation, Robert. Kathleen, I would love for you to leave any final thoughts. We've talked about energy, we've talked about loss, moving through that, opportunities that we all have to tap into our self-awareness, right? To feel our feelings, to tap into our experiences. And so if you just sort of wrap up some final thoughts around that, and then I'd like to give you an opportunity to share what you're working on and how people can get in touch with you.
Awesome. Thank you, Whitney. And thank you, Robert, both of you, for having me today. One of the last thoughts I want to just share with you is anxiety and depression comes from where you're living, meaning in your mind. And so when you are ruminating over what's occurred, you're living in the past, and that causes the depression because you can't change it. If you're living too far into the future, you're causing anxiety because where you are right now emotionally is projecting where you think you're going to be in the future. And so some of the tools that I use is just breathing. Any leader can breathe with their eyes open, with someone in front of you. It doesn't matter. If you find anxiety or your mind starts to wander, bring yourself back to your breath. I teach the 4 square method. There's all kinds of breath methods. It's pretty easy. Breathe into the count of 4, hold it to the count of 4, breathe out to the count of 4, hold it to the count of 4, and do that 4 times in a row. And it will bring you back into the moment. So each time that you find yourself living either in the future or in the past, come back to the moment by just focusing on your breath. Believe that you can make it through this. Like, believe that it doesn't have to be like this all the time. I promise you from my experience that I was not the person I am 13 years ago, like even 3 years ago. From the experiences that I've had, I promise you, you do not have to live in the suffering.
That is so good. So talk a little bit about, just briefly, I want to share, you actually have more than one book, but we're going to talk about the Shattered Together briefly, and then you can mention the other books that you have as well.
Great. So Shattered Together, A Mother's Journey from Grief to Belief, is the earlier stages in my experience of the healing journey that I was on. And so the book is laid out so where you can just open it up to any particular chapter you want. You don't have to read it chronologically, or you can read it chronologically. But it is a self-help. It's a little bit memoir, and it's a daily practice. So at the end of each chapter, there's daily practices that I incorporate into the book that I used. The importance of all of that is that you get to find what works for you that's best for you. That my journey is different than your journey. I'm just a resource that gets to share with you what's worked for me, and you get to experience. Which brings me to, you have to invest in yourself and in this journey in order to step through it. If you don't, you're going to live in the pain. You're going to cause more pain for yourself. You're going to cause more pain for your loved ones and cause more pain for your employees.
Absolutely. And all of us, right? All of us, regardless of what positions we hold, what titles we hold, taking the time to work through our journeys will benefit our lives. But what we go through is not solely for us and our benefit, right? It's opportunity to be a light for people on their journeys as well. So how can people get in touch with you, and what do you have coming up that might be of interest to our audience?
Great. I'm on all the social media networks. However, you can just go to my website at CathleenElle.com and scroll to the bottom. You can find my social media there. It's just easier to go to the website. On my website, there's an events page, and I am creating a program right now that's a 6-month program with a retreat at the end. The 6 months, it starts in July. And it will be a monthly group call with fellow leaders who have lost children. And that we'll have experts come in to teach you some modalities that you can use, some practices that you can use in your journey. Then we'll have one-on-one calls, so where I'll be coaching them. We'll be setting the intentions on a weekly basis. I'll be sharing with them either a meditation or inspiration through text. And then at the end, we'll be spending a week in Ecuador, sitting with plant medicine, shamanic journeying, connecting with the land, and really going deeper into your soul and to reconnect with your soul and your loved one's soul.
Love that. Love that. Love everything you do, Kathleen. I love you. Yeah, you are amazing. You are such a great example of how we can, regardless of what we've been through, right? And all of us have been through something, right? Even if your particular experience doesn't involve the loss of a child or other loved ones, there are other experiences that you've had, the loss of your innocence or childhood, right? Just it goes on and on. And so much of what we are seeing in our society, American society in particular, is the result of people acting out because they haven't dealt with the traumas in their lives, right? Exactly. So they're not feeling what they're feeling, and then they're projecting it and acting out and the like. So we want to thank you for joining us. Kathleen, thank you. And audience, thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. Robert, if someone was interested in getting in touch with you and working with you, how could they go about doing that?
Yeah, they can reach out to me through my email, which is inspireme@roberthilliardcoaching.com. Or they can get in touch with me by my website. So they can go to my website, which is Robert Hilliard Coaching, and fill out a form for a discovery call.
Awesome. Awesome. And if there's anything that I can do for you, I would invite you to connect with me. shiftingintoaction.now.site. I have a couple of ebooks there available as my gift to you. One related to your work journey and one related to your wellness journey. Both touch on some of the things that we've talked about here today, because there's a commonality across the board of the things that we go through and that help move us to where it is we want to go. So you can check that out there. Again, Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time, your energy, and until next time, Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. Take care of yourself. Feel what you're feeling. Tap into your experiences. Everything you need, you have within you, and it's just a matter of time before you can tap into it and draw out what you need. So take care.